All right, welcome to what we're going to call the first episode of the Anabolic Enquiry. My name's Tyson from the Strongman Way, and our special guest or the lead on this little podcast series is going to be Mr. Connor Walsh. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Mr. Connor.
Look, honestly, I'm just a long-term gym rat. Been competing in kind of fairly high-level competitive powerlifting for close to a decade now. Um, love
Eight, your
sport.
best total, I believe, something like that.
Yeah, we won't talk about our best
It
titles.
hurts,
It's
doesn't it?
pretty
Like they're so
abysmal,
close
but
to 900.
yeah, I just can't hold on to deadlifts. But
Yeah,
we'll
yeah,
worry about that another time. But
yeah.
look, I just really kind of a high school gym bro that's kind of stayed that way. Always been super passionate, especially about the nutrition side of things, and kind of nutrition leads into supplementation and then pharmaceuticals, and it's just kind of a rabbit hole I kind of dived down when I was kind of a young teenager and haven't gotten out of it since.
I mean, which is how many of us start now. The key thing is your nutrition coach, and for the intents and purposes of like what our podcast or chats will be, which is something that's widely discussed or like more widely discussed now, but maybe in strength sports less. Do you know what I mean? Like there's less material, there's less education, there's less people sort of giving insights about this is, and why we've coined it the anabolic inquiry, which is we're going to be talking a lot about like performance optimization, performance enhancement, and pharmaceutical use, basically. So, like, and that goes not just for like power. We're going to talk about in general, like health and like how that maybe ties into nutrition. But I thought of the name Anabolic Inquiry purely because the way that these chats are kind of going to go is it's an opportunity for me to sit here and learn and pick the brain of someone who knows more, and you guys can ride along. So it's going to be pretty relaxed. Today's kind of a bit of a introduction into Connor, kicking off the series with some just like frequently asked or like frequently asked questions around testosterone, around performance enhancement, and a whole bunch of other topics. Do you want to jump in and dive in? What do you reckon?
Yeah, yeah, sure, I'm ready to go.
The first question I had, because a lot of these questions come from dealings with clients, you know what I mean? Like we got a heap of clients and dealing with strongman or like Gen Pop. The first question is, I feel like we're currently in the golden era of TRT. Right? When I started working in a gym 14, 13 years ago, if you said testosterone in a commercial gym, like people's eyes would pop and they'd be taken aback, right? Testosterone was this like I mean, it depends where you grew up, it depends what your first gyms were, but mine were commercial gyms. They were leisure centers,
Yeah.
I was a leisure center manager, and it was a really big deal to say the word testosterone. And now I've got every fucking person under 40 years, over 40 years old asking me about TRT. What do you think? Like the testosterone replacement therapy has become sort of like the hot topic. But it's become such a popular premise. Um, are there things that people should be considering? Is it even an option or something that you think that everybody over the age of 40 should be doing? Are there things that people should be considering before it? What's your take on the TRT phenomena?
Right, this is one that's kind of pretty close to home for me, actually. It's kind of how my anabolic steroid journey started. Not intentionally, but it's just how it ended up being. I was hypergonad by the age of 15. I was extremely obese as a child, developed gynecomastia and stuff like that. I hit puberty very young. But yeah, I started developing like breast tissue and had some pretty obvious hormonal imbalances, likely from being quite overweight. Soon following that, I kind of got into shape and then fell into a little bit of a kind of spiral of disordered eating, a little bit of anorexia and bulimia throughout the years, and did a real number on my endocrine system.
Yep.
Um, I had multiple sets of blood work pulled when I was between the ages of 15 and 16, which had a total testosterone of between 8 and 10.2 nanomoles.
Yep.
So very, very low. Um,
Especially for a young guy who's getting pumped for like in that time period, we should be getting pumped full of testosterone to grow and to like masculinize, right?
for sure, yeah. And like that was one thing for me I noticed, because I said I hit puberty fairly early, so I started kind of going through those masculinizing physical changes and whatnot. I quickly started to see regression in some of those masculinizing traits that had
Yep.
occurred through puberty. the kind of standard stuff, like erectile problems and stuff that seem to
Yeah.
come with low testosterone when I was, 16, 15 years
And
old
you,
during
you
a
feel like
time
this
that
was
shouldn't be an
mostly
issue.
due to like eating behaviors, like psychological stuff, like being overweight, being underweight, and all that sort of stuff. It's like just the stress that was going on as like a young person.
Yeah, look, there's not so much to talk about heaps, but like I did some stupid things like I remember periods of time where I went 8 or 9 days without eating post
Yeah.
binge eating, kind of binge eating cycles when I was younger. So no doubt, putting a lot of unnecessary stress on the body,
Yeah,
and I
of
was
course.
still playing baseball at a very high level, so
Yeah.
high
You were
level of
playing
physical
baseball
demand.
at the same time at a high level while going through this as like a young teen.
Yeah, it was a bit of a
Kind of,
roller coaster.
it's like navigating it, right? And I think that it's like I think a lot of us have similar stories. Like I was overweight, like you're a teenager. Or like younger than a teenager, like I wasn't even overweight, but kids are fucking cruel. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mm,
and like
sure.
your parents are like, like you're gonna. My dad was a big guy, like was a big guy, not like a like solid fucking fight up athletic guy. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, your dad was chubby when he was a kid. You'll grow into it. It'll all be fine. And you sort of think that, but like you're a kid and kids are fucking cruel and you start carrying this. Like I remember being a teenager getting to the gym. We get into the gym because we want to fix that problem, right? You become obsessed with the gym, but then that obsession comes into like what you would generally call disordered eating or poor relationships with food. Do you know what I mean? Like if you did come home from school and binge and get too carried away, I'd go for a fucking 10K run after I'd ate everything. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't because I was trying to be healthy and it's seen as healthy, but you're trying to mitigate the food thing because you've got this really unhealthy relationship with food. So I think a lot of us sort of come from a similar background, right? But continue on.
No, completely. Yeah, no, exactly the same kind of mentality that I had. For me, it was either an excessive amount of exercise or
Yeah.
an excessive amount of restriction from
Yeah.
food post mishap or binge episode
Yeah.
or whatever it was. Like I, this was a good thing and a bad thing. I started tracking my food way back before even my fitness pal was around. I used to get a hand diary, jump on Google, look for the nutrition information for the food, and start tracking it.
Yeah. The
So I
same.
learned kind of, yeah, I learned macro
That's
tracking when I
fascinating
was,
actually hearing it from you because it's literally the same story. Like I was 15, 16, I'd count my almonds on a Sunday, divvy out my food for school. I was the kid eating fucking tuna and water, like tuna with fresh water and raw broccoli and weighed out rice at lunchtime. Do you know what I mean? Like I was
yeah,
real like an early adopter. Do you know what I mean? But it didn't
yeah,
come from like like it came from performance. I wanted to fucking be jacked, but it wasn't coming from that same like it was when you look in hindsight, it's distorted, right? It's a little bit different.
yeah, for sure. Um, as well, when kind of mix that with a young and naive mindset, I was just pushing things way too hard. I kind of
Yeah.
thought that 1,200 or 1,300 calories or whatever it was like a normal way to diet, and
Yeah.
obviously that's not what you need when you're
Yeah.
going through puberty and trying to develop.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so whilst the learning to track was good in terms of my long-term progression and kind of
Mm.
getting my head around the nutrition side of things, it definitely kind of fed into that eating disorder side of things. To loop back to the original question, obviously on testosterone replacement. So, I went through about 3 different sets of blood work over about an 18-month period. By the time I had my third set, I hit a 10.2,
Yeah.
which at the time scraped back into the reference range.
Yeah.
Back then, the reference range was 10 to 35 on most labs. As you probably notice now, it's going down as low as about 6
Mm.
on some labs. So by the time I had my third test, the doctor said, we're not interested in doing anything here. Here's a referral for a psychiatrist to deal with kind of the depressive symptoms of the low
Yeah.
testosterone. Don't come back to the office. We're not going to treat this issue.
Yeah. Interesting.
Fast forward about 6 months, I kind of took it into my own hands, and
Yeah.
we began TRT. So,
Yeah. And
um,
legitimate TRT when you started as like a young person, did you
no,
research that? No, it was just like you
no,
started using drugs. Yeah.
yeah. So, like 10 years ago, as kind of you alluded to, with the way testosterone and just the word anabolic steroid and all that, it was just so taboo. Nobody talked about it. It
How
was,
old were you here?
I believe I was 16 when
Yeah, it's
I
young.
when I
Yeah.
first started.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Look, obviously the age thing being one big thing, and doctors just really don't want to play with hormones in children, which is,
No.
warranted. But
Mm.
at a certain point, there still needs to be issues addressed and fixed.
Well,
Um,
there's like sometimes an intervention is called for, right? Like there's
yeah, for
detriment
sure.
not acting. There's detriments to acting 100%. You can understand why people are hesitant to mess with hormones, but when there's a hormone imbalance or malfunction, then that probably needs to be addressed too, which I think nowadays is getting much better addressed, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, and I wasn't even kind of clued up enough to pick on this at the time, but like I had gynecomastia forming and stuff like that, so it was pretty obvious that there was physical
Mm.
hormone imbalances that
Yeah.
were actually causing physical trait changes.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, yep. So fast forwarding, so they were not interested in dealing with me. I took it into my own hands, um, and obviously I'm kind of grateful for it. It kind of took me down the path that I ended up. Obviously with powerlifting, it probably would have ended up down a very similar path,
Mm.
even if it hadn't have started there. Um, so yeah, look, I think testosterone replacement therapy is a fantastic tool and something that is great that we have available. Obviously, it has become way over popularized, I guess. Everyone's kind of thinking they need TRT by the mid 20s, and you get people coming to me and they've got a testosterone of like 23, and they're like, "Well, it's not over 30. Do I need TRT?"
Yeah.
Well, probably not.
Yeah.
Um, and also, there are plenty of lifestyle interventions. Obviously, I think it's pretty aware to most people that our current modern lifestyle is not overly conducive to high testosterone levels and kind of optimal hormonal health.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So there's plenty of things that can certainly be addressed outside of going straight to pharmaceutical interventions. But at the same time, I don't think there's really much in the way of long-term negative drawback from a mortality and a kind of a physical health point. With testosterone replacement therapy, provided it is legitimate kind of range
Yeah.
testosterone replacement therapy, not kind of sports TRT or um, just kind of bodybuilding TRT, with what's often classed somewhere between 200 and 500 milligrams. Now
Yeah.
people are calling TRT, which is just not TRT. Um, so yeah, look, are we in a golden age? We're definitely in a much better age now where it is accepted and you can go to a doctor and you can talk about things. And there's still doctors that are stuck in their ways, but at least there's kind of avenues for communications and people that you can see to seek legitimate good help. But I think with the prevalence of testosterone in the media currently, we've kind of ended up with a little bit of a crowd that's kind of too eager to pull the pin
Mhm.
on testosterone
Yeah, I
and
feel
think
like
it's kind of the cure for all problems.
the bubble's got to pop at some point, right? Like
Yeah,
it's not too bad in Australia, but you look at America and they've got these issues, like not issues, but there's testosterone replacement therapy centers on every corner kind of stuff. That's sort of like how it's being coined. The bubble's probably going to pop at some point. The pendulum swings too far one way before it swings the other way. Like, there's not, I wouldn't say if you're not a performance enhancing drug user in their 20s, even early 30s, if you're not doing that, there would have to be a significant reason or a legitimate blood work reason to think that you need to be on TRT because it's a life decision for most people. Do you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that's like you're going to be replacing your hormones unless you want to stick a needle in yourself 1 to 2 times a week for the next 40 years. Don't look for natural ways to improve your hormone function, right? Because there's great ways to upregulate your natural testosterone production. But then you look at like, so if I'm over 40, do you kind of look at that more seriously and go, well, realistically, over 40 on the downward slide, is it something you go, you know what, for over 40s, I pretty much recommend it for most?
look, not a full blanket statement, but yeah, I do think the quality of life improvements that come from testosterone replacement therapy are probably um, worth any minor potential risks that come from replacing endogenous testosterone with an exogenous source.
Which is like, I mean, when we're talking about testosterone and in men, but we have quite a good capacity even without. So, like, I tend to agree, which is why I'm sort of asking the question as well. Like, I tend to agree that, like, as you get further down the line, from a quality of life standpoint and from and even like a disease standpoint. Like there's some really positive positive impacts that keeping a higher level of, or a more like steady level of testosterone can give, right? Or produce. Females don't have the same capacity to be able to maintain hormone function like we do into older age, right? It's a
for
fucking
sure.
switch. There's a lot of good information about the HRT thing for females now too, which is fantastic. Which we can probably go to in a later podcast.
Well, honestly, on that, just quickly, I would probably say that post-menopause hormone replacement therapy for females is probably even more
Far
important.
more important, far more
Yeah,
important because
yeah,
they don't have the capacity like we still have testosterone happening. Like we can hold on to
yeah,
that for a lot longer. Like females, like the HRT side of things post menopause is huge and pre-menopause too. Like in those early signs, jumping on it early can make a big difference, right?
for
Which we're
sure.
seeing a lot more information on now too.
And I think also that's probably something to consider if you are a female looking into performance enhancing drugs and where you sit in that kind of menopause timeline, because it changes what you may want to take. Obviously, as you said, hormone production significantly declines after menopause.
Mm.
And taking compounds like, Anavar, for example, which is kind of your go-to first hormone for most females, when you've got all that other hormone production that's no longer kind of going on from your ovaries and whatnot post menopause, your production for stuff like estrogen becomes an issue. So you're going to take a compound that's androgenic, not able to aromatize or cause any estrogen production. You're already not really producing estrogen from the ovaries. Now you're going to run into issues where your estrogen's too low, which is a problem. It can be quite a severe health problem. It can also cause mood disturbances and
Really
stuff like
bad
that as
mood.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Very. You sort of talked about, and this was the second thing that we're going to discuss anyway, is sports TRT or replacement therapy versus TRT. We all have a bro in the gym who's telling us that they're on TRT, but they're taking 250 milligrams or 500 milligrams of test. Not TRT, bro. What's your take, or like, do you have a general? I mean, obviously, to dial it in, you're probably going to look at blood work and have a look at like where that's sitting to really dial it in with someone. But do you have like like you got a Broderick Chavez who sort of says 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight or so? Do you have like an idea of what you call sports TRT? Like, should people who are competing in strength sports or other high level sports, should they be taking a higher dose than TRT, or should they be coming to like a proper TRT between or bridging cycles?
Um, I do think that competitive athletes probably need to be on a higher dose than
Mhm.
TRT in most cases. Just coming from a point, obviously, you've probably experienced it yourself. You get to a certain point of development in the sport that, when performance enhancing drugs are at play, you take them out of the picture and there's no way that you're progressing. Like once you're a certain part, kind of past that kind of genetic natural limitation of strength and size and everything, there's just no way that even with your training being 100% on point, nutrition 100% on point, over the counter supplements 100% on point, there's still going to be some level of regression in
Mm.
terms of training performance and body composition and whatnot at a certain point. Um, so I think the terminology needs to be changed. TRT is exactly what it says, replacement of testosterone within endogenous or
Yeah,
normal endogenous parameters. I have no issues with athletes cruising, which I think should be used as a separate term, a cruise or a bridge or whatever, not TRT, because it's
yeah,
not. But cruising on a higher than physiological hormone level, whether that be all from testosterone or maybe predominantly testosterone and a little bit of another androgen that doesn't aromatize if you have kind of estrogenic problems. Um, I think a cruise should be looked at the minimum amount that you can take to maintain training performance and still return blood markers to where they need to return to.
yeah.
I think that situation can change depending on what your competition calendar looks like. There may be different kind of variations of what a cruise looks like depending
Mhm.
on kind of your timeline for the competitive season that year.
Of course.
Um, but yeah, I don't think necessarily a cruise or a health phase needs to be a TRT for athletes. In fact, I think most athletes, especially start kind of moving into the more elite territory, are going to be doing themselves fairly large disservice by going back to a true TRT.
And I think
Um,
like a
but
lot
yeah,
of high level athletes, you probably find from a blood work and blood panel perspective that if you drop back to 125 milligrams or 150 milligrams of test, you might really not be sitting as high in that range as what you think. You know what I mean? If you
yeah,
drop it back, like especially bigger guys, like if you're looking at like bigger, like I'm dealing with strongman guys or bigger powerlifter guys that are 140, 150 kilos, you drop them back to like a generalized TRT, like a generalized TRT dose, and you'll find that they're probably under range anyway. Um,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
what do you think? So next one is around sensitivity to testosterone. I know that I've dealt with a few clients who have found that they're super sensitive to testosterone and can't run their testosterone high. And I've also had a client who, and this is what spurred this on, like he was having a lot of trouble and he ended up going down the TRT path. He did have low testosterone, like reasonably low, right? Below a marker that we consider the TRT. He got legitimate TRT and prescribed. And he had a lot of trouble. So he was super sensitive to it. His mood was having trouble. He had a few other little issues that sort of arise that I'd never heard of before. But I've also got a couple clients who, with a very low dose of testosterone, I've seen significant swings in like blood paneling and markers. What do you do with those people who are quite sensitive to testosterone who want to either compete or still probably would benefit from being or getting their testosterone in normal ranges?
Yeah, I think there's probably two slightly different scenarios depending on whether you're talking from the athlete point of view or the just the kind of straight up hormone replacement
Yeah, let's go both.
person.
Let's go athlete first.
All right, with an athlete, with testosterone, it is obviously bioidentical hormone. It's one that your body's going to recognize probably the best. Relatively compared to other compounds, I think the safety profile is quite good. Obviously, it is required in most cycle setups to maintain kind of normal hormonal function,
Mhm.
kind of provide us with our estrogen via aromatase, perform the functions of testosterone in terms of kind of, just basic um, sexual functions and stuff like that.
Yep.
Um, and I do think it's a pretty good anabolic as well that a lot of people kind of shy away from because you've got all these other cool, trendier drugs that are around now. But
Oh,
I don't think testosterone's. There are a lot of coaches that are running, your TRT, and then everything else is
driving the other
other
pathways really hard.
anabolics.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I still think that there is for most people some benefits to be gained from running testosterone beyond replacement.
Mm.
Obviously, where people have kind of a diminishing return on testosterone dose is going to depend on how high they push it up.
Mhm.
As you've mentioned, I've had clients that at 175, 200 milligrams, they're already seeing the 200, 250 estrogen,
Yeah. Yep.
and running into heavy aromatase issues. Typically, they tend to be um, it's a bit of generalization, but I find that typically the more unhealthy individual, the
Sure.
less metabolically fit person
Yep.
carrying more body fat, the worst lifestyle choices.
Mhm.
But they do exist, and sometimes you do still see that in people that are doing everything right.
Mhm.
And if you're in that camp, then you find whatever that tolerable dose of testosterone is enough
Yep.
to keep baseline function of sex hormone function and estrogen production, stuff of that nature. And then you add whatever other anabolics you tend to tolerate on top of that.
Right.
Um,
That's just an experimentation thing, right? Like what you tolerate better. You might find that like a Masteron or a Primo that doesn't or like that doesn't rise your estrogen as much or almost will manage estrogen might be a better option. Is that what you would
yep,
sort of go down the path of or
for sure. Yeah, yeah. Typically, yeah, the second compound will be a DHT, maybe even a 19 more, depending
yeah.
on what the need of that individual is.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think for most people, I find around about 500 to 600 milligrams of testosterone ends up being kind of
Like top end.
where, yeah, where most people are still able to manage side effects pretty well,
Yep.
but you're still getting a nice improvement in terms of anabolism and neural drive from the testosterone and everything.
Aside
Um,
aside to our original question, but do you see that there's a benefit to push up to a gram or like above a gram for people, or do you think there's a point of diminishing return?
um, I think most people will get them, and also it's going to come down to what your total milligrams are. So if we're taking 3,000 milligrams, then a gram of test really isn't that much.
Yeah.
If you're someone who's taking 1,500 milligrams, then a gram of test relatively is going to be it's a lot
In
of
comparison to the
testosterone.
balance of the other compounds, right? It's quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Um, I find around about a third to a half of the total anabolic load coming from testosterone
Interesting.
is probably around about the ballpark for most people,
Yep.
where I end up having. Yeah. So, and then I have the complete other end of the spectrum. I've had athletes where I've gone kind of my more typical approach with that kind of a third-ish testosterone and then remainder kind of DHT and a little bit of 19 more. And they feel like shit.
Yep.
And they just perform and they feel much better on like a grammar test and maybe a little bit of AI.
Hmm. Yep.
So there is kind of a probably a middle 80 percentile, which this kind of framework is going to work pretty well for, but you can't take a framework and apply it to everyone exactly the same because everyone's response to drugs is just completely different.
Of course. And if you've got someone who's sensitive who is who's gone down the TRT route, but it isn't responding super well, is having some side effects. Is it just jump off and look to the natural remedies and try to increase the testosterone through other avenues?
That is definitely one approach. We have some pretty good pharmacological interventions in terms of stuff like human chorionic gonadotropin,
Yeah.
human menopausal gonadotropin, we've got recombinant follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, stuff of that nature, which is still hormone replacement to some degree because they are gonadotropins. They are still exogenous hormones that you are taking to stimulate the Leydig cells in the testicles to produce more testosterone.
Mhm.
So it is still there is still some form of hypothalamus pituitary testicular axis shutdown when you use these compounds because the pituitary and the hypothalamus are no longer having to produce kind of the precursing signals to the testicles to make the testosterone.
Yep.
But it is a perfectly valid and some people more convenient way of going about testosterone replacement. It's typically 3 subcutaneous injections a week or something like that for a protocol of that nature.
Yes.
And obviously, you're maintaining kind of full testicular, well, not full, but the majority of your testicular function is remains. So stuff like
Versus
fertility
shutting
and
down.
stuff, if
Yep.
that's going to be a high priority,
Mm.
is there's going to be benefits there. At the same time, I'm not completely against a small amount of a non-aromatizable compound being used in HRT for just your average person. Um, Something along the lines of, I've got one client where I've used 140 milligrams of testosterone, and we were still seeing, sorry, he was initially on 175 milligrams of testosterone, and we still saw a fairly significant elevation in estrogen levels. So we kind of swapped things around. We dropped his testosterone down to 140 and added 70 milligrams of masteron
Mm.
per week.
So
So very
increase the total
slight.
milligrams, but just manage the estrogen a little bit.
Yeah,
Because I mean, you've
exactly.
got two options, right? You can add more anabolics and manage the estrogen, or you can manage the estrogen and crash estrogen with like something that's going to be like an anti-aromatizer. But like, if you can do that by using another compound that's going to add benefit, then that's probably the better option most of the time, or for most people, right? Versus like throwing in
Yeah.
something that's going to pull the lever too hard on the other side.
Yeah. So look, I have absolutely zero problem with AIs. I don't. I think they cop a lot of bad rap.
Mm.
Um, I wouldn't go adding total milligrams if you're not already planning on adding total milligrams.
Yeah, sure.
If
Yeah.
your kind of goal total milligrams is 200, you're probably not going to need anything other. In most cases, not going to need anything other than testosterone. Go with your AI. Don't just go adding more anabolic
Yeah.
compound because you need to control estrogen. So now you're taking 300 or 400 milligrams instead of
Yeah.
200.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I think that's a bit of a mistake a lot of people fall into is they
Yeah.
go, I need to control estrogen. And now their cruise turns into a
Yeah.
cycle because they're
Yeah.
on
Sure. Yeah.
multiple compounds that,
I keep adding this. I need to sprinkle a bit of this on. Let's put this
yeah.
up a little bit. Yeah.
So yeah, look, I have no issues with AIs. If you're kind of already at that set milligram point, you don't really want to pull the testosterone down, then go for the AI.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, the dosages that they come in are typically for people with cancers and breast cancers, which are designed to aggressively
Yeah.
crush estrogen. So you need to be, careful with the way you dose these, and blood work is imperative for ensuring that your dosing protocol for aromatase inhibitors is correct for your genetics and your current, anabolic intake. A lot of people just take too much, or they'll go the lazy route. You get 1 milligram of Arimidex tabs. So
Yeah.
maybe I just take my 1 milligram of Arimidex once a week. So you're getting
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
big,
Spike and
big
then top
peak in
off.
aromatase
Yeah.
inhibition, and then it's falling off. So yeah, I think a good starting point if you are a little bit above reference range, you just wanted to knock it down for kind of your Aromasin and your Arimidex, about a quarter of a standard dose.
Yeah.
So about a quarter of a milligram or
0.25
6.25
every other
milligrams.
day or something like that.
Yep. Yeah, that's the perfect way to start. And when incorporating AIs, I would rather start low and increase based off blood work than the other way around and
Yeah,
crash
yeah,
estrogen
crash
and
it
then
early.
derail shit.
Yeah, that makes total
Yeah.
sense. I want to jump on, but I want to be able to have kids. Um, the probably the biggest one that you get is like, oh, I'm gonna freeze sperm, and no one ever does. Like I said that, I'm pretty sure as well. But like,
Yeah, I
everyone,
did
oh, I
too.
want to go freeze sample, and then you go figure out how much it's going to cost, and you got to go fucking up to somewhere like a Monash and go do it. You're like, maybe I'm not going to do that. But like that's probably the biggest consideration is like that I hear young guys have or guys coming through is like I really want to, but I want to have kids. Is it something that people should be factoring in, or do you think that it's? I mean, obviously everybody's different, and I won't preface that by saying like obviously everybody's different, but do you think there's something that is a non-factor and there's always ways to work out the fertility side of stuff on the back end, or do you think that it's something that people should be taking seriously and chucking some in a freezer just in case if it's really important to them?
Yeah, look, realistically, I think with the technology that we have, 99% of people that do at some point in their life partake in anabolic steroids are more than likely going to be able to return to a maybe not an optimal fertility range, but enough of a fertility range to get the job done.
Yeah.
Um, Having said that, there is always people that get the shit end of the stick,
Yeah.
and that doesn't happen. So
Great.
I don't think that you should enter into steroid use without any kind of thought about that, and definitely need to consider it as a risk.
Yeah, my biggest thing for people is like, can you take responsibility for the action and the choice that you make? Right. Like
Yeah,
I always said, I was young, I was pretty young, I was 21. And I always said I didn't know that I wanted to have kids. I didn't really think that I wanted to have kids, right? And I always said, if I can't have kids, I made a choice, my responsibility, my problem. This is the path I chose. I can't be upset about it. I can't curse the word about it. You make a decision, you're a fucking adult, and you deal with the consequences later if that tide turns or you have a partner, right? You might lose a partner over it, but
yeah,
like
for
you make
sure.
a choice, right? But like I said, most people that I've dealt with can generally find that like it's not. Oh man, I've got friends who have had it happen while using. Do you know what I mean? When they should have been
Yeah,
fucking completely shut down. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So like it really depends on the person, right?
yeah, for sure. And I think that's another big thing is the adult part. See, the clients that I deal with that are adults that are concerned about fertility, they don't, they go and get their stuff frozen. There is no
Mm.
concern there. It's the
Yeah, yeah,
kids,
yeah,
the young ones, the ones that
yeah, yeah,
probably
yeah,
don't have the mental capacity to make that decision in the first place, and
yeah.
also don't have the money to safeguard themselves.
No, yeah,
They're the ones that are going to get themselves into problem. And the longer you're on these things, more than likely the more chance there is of potential
of course.
fertility
Yeah,
issues for sure.
yeah.
So
I mean, my personal story was like where I was off at the time. I hadn't been using or whatever. I just like was using TRT, I think. And my partner and I had this conversation about the fact that like, well, it was really important to her. She was a new partner at the time. It was really important to her that like if we could have kids or wanted to have kids and I was gonna start competing again, right? So I said, that's fine. Take a fucking heap of HCG, I'll come off and I'll go get tested and then I'll go free some, right? And this is different when you are an adult. Do you know what I mean? I'm 30 years old now. And then I came off for 2 weeks and I had a doctor referral and I was just about to start the HCG after 2 weeks or 3 weeks of just stopping testosterone. My partner told me, don't worry about it. She said, don't go to the appointment. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, I'm pregnant. Within 2 weeks, come on, you know what I mean? Like that
fucking
is,
hell.
do you know what I mean? Like, and that's like, so very, very comfortable. That's 10 years, do you know what I mean? Of like, but no, I have friends who have had a hard time and I've had friends who had a very, very comfortable time. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's different for everybody. I think we would probably both agree as well that the age thing is like both of us, if you're starting at 21 or 16, it's like you're 100% right in your statement. Like when you're young, you don't have the money, you're not getting blood tests. You're not
Yeah.
freezing your fucking sperm. You're not, because you don't have the money or the foresight to be doing that. How we operate now is going to be very different to how we operated when we were 18 years old or 21 years old. Do you know what I mean? Like, and the
That's
information is different now, but you don't have the maturity to like cross the T's and dot the I's because you want to buy the protein, but you want to buy the testosterone and you got to pay for your gym membership and you want to go out on the weekend. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, what goes? Well, my blood work goes. That's
yeah.
what's happened, you know?
Yeah. Look, I'll just touch on that though. Like in Australia, you don't have a fucking excuse for that. We have Medicare.
Oh,
Like maybe you're not getting, the full blown 10 vial blood test where they're checking everything. But like, even if you are in financial issues and you, for whatever reason, decide that it is a smart opportunity or a smart choice for you to
mm,
embark on steroid use in Australia, if you're not getting your blood work done, you are the only one to blame. We have a
mhm,
health system that is set
mhm,
up
mhm.
to allow people that don't have finances to still have access to the same medical, services that those that do. So
Uh-huh. And if you're a
that's
kid,
just, yeah,
yeah, if you're a kid listening to this or like a younger person listening to this and you don't have the balls to tell your doctor that you're using testosterone, can I get a blood test? You shouldn't be on testosterone.
yeah,
Like that's
I
that's it.
100%
Do you know
agree
what I mean?
for
Like,
sure.
a guy's like, oh, but like doctor always. I'm like, bro, it's for fucking free, and all you got to do is be a man and tell them what you're doing a fucking dumb thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, that's it. That's all. And they go, okay, you're doing a dumb thing, slap on the wrist, but you're gonna do it anyway. Here's your blood test. And if your
yeah,
doctor is a motherfucker, go find another doctor because they'll do
for
it.
sure.
You know what I mean? Um, Speaking of this, how old? Considerations for age. Like I've got a current, yeah. Anyway, how old?
Oh, I have a really hard time giving a straight answer on this one because
You don't have
it's,
to give like an actual answer, but like, are there considerations that you think around age? Do you think that there's like a minimum standard? Do you think like from a personal experience? There's some things I think from a personal experience, it's probably more psychological, like from an under 25-year-old wrapping your identity around like I don't beat around the bush. Like you're a drug user. Like we can say, and I love it, like performance optimization, enhancement, steroid abuse. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like it's a drug. Like people don't
yeah,
want to
for
call
sure.
a spade, and they'll dance around in a fucking heap, right? You can do it intelligently, you can do it smartly, but let's call a spade. Like it's a drug, it's a class one drug, it's a thing, right? Now, um, I think as a young person under the age of 25 or even like under 30, the biggest thing is while you're developing an identity and developing self-awareness and stuff like that, wrapping your identity around the gym, around lifting, around being the big guy, never wanting to come off because you want to chase those fucking numbers and you're getting validation from being a strong cunt. Like, I think those things are the biggest danger around the use and then the abuse that the abuse comes from that side of stuff, the mental side of stuff, I think. Thoughts, considerations?
Look, obviously, being someone who started very young, I'm not going to sit here and say that you need to wait till you're 25 to start because I
Yeah,
don't
on the
think
same.
that that's,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then you're going
Look,
to. This is the thing. They're not going to because I was
exactly.
18 and if I had access at 18, I would have taken steroids. I just
Yeah,
didn't fucking know how to get them, right? But I didn't watch natural body. I didn't watch strength sports. I watched bodybuilding. I didn't
yeah,
watch
same.
bodybuilding. I
No,
didn't think,
it's
oh, I
Ronnie
want to look
Coleman,
like that fucking big natty guy.
Marcus
Watching,
Rule.
like I'm watching fucking Ronnie
No,
Coleman, I'm watching Jay
yeah,
Cutler up there, I'm watching all the fucking big guys up there, jacked as fuck, being like, I want to be a big cunt, like
yeah.
that's what it was. So if you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it. You may as well hopefully do it with some sort of like intelligence, right? So sorry, continue on, go for it.
Honestly, that's really where it would come in for me is like if you're not, I mean, look, anyone, but like especially if you're a younger individual, if you're going to embark on this, don't embark alone. Get a coach, hire
Yep,
someone that knows what they're doing, someone
yep,
that's already made the fuck ups that you're going to make up
yep,
if you don't hire someone to teach you how to do it properly.
yeah,
Because I mean, it's probably how you learn a lot of your things. It's how I learned most of my stuff because I've made heaps of fuck ups. I
yeah, bro.
royally
Because the
screwed so
guy
many things
Dermot
up.
tells you to take this because he's a bodybuilder and he goes, take this 6 times a week. You're like,
Yeah,
okay, no worries.
exactly. Yeah. And look, I might be able to find some later. I've kept all my blood work since I was 15 years old. I've got
Great.
a
Yeah.
file with about
Fantastic. Yeah.
60 sets of blood work in it.
Yeah.
I can show you some of my blood work from when I was a teenager, when I was, the healthiest, most
Mm.
resilient my body should be, and it's fucking horrendous compared
Yeah,
to what it is now.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, is one I didn't have the maturity to kind of pick a route that was probably sustainable. I was always kind of looking for the secret, the exotic stuff, trenbolones, the orals, the stuff like
Yeah, yeah,
that.
sure.
And I think that's very common with younger people.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Yeah,
think you
yeah,
see
yeah.
it on
You're more
TikTok and
aggressive,
stuff.
you're way more aggressive when you're younger. This is the thing that I'm always conscious of, and like you don't in a position of education or a position with like influence, you want to be very careful how you frame this. But like it, you're more aggressive when you're younger, but it's hard to discount how much that aggressiveness propels those early years of training. Do you know what I mean? Like I would train aggressively, I trained
Yeah,
stupidly, and I was probably stupider with drugs. I'm smarter now, but fuck it, like it does get you pretty far. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, well, that,
You can
for
train
sure.
with a fucking lot of like push, and you can push, and you can be done with the other stuff or any performance stuff, and it will propel you to be a lot stronger, a lot quicker. But it does have its drawbacks.
Yeah, I mean, look, just use my own scenario. I was and still am the strongest teenager in Australian history in terms of powerlifting. I would stay up most nights wondering when I was going to die.
Mm.
Like that was one of the big things for me as a teenager. It's like, fuck, I can't do this for a long period of time. And like maybe it was a little bit, over and just overthinking things and probably being a little bit too kind of scared, I guess. But
Drugs can also do that to you. You know what
definitely,
I
yeah,
mean?
for sure.
Like
That's a part of
paranoia,
it.
like
Yeah,
if you're taking Tren and stuff like that paranoia, the drug stuff, like sexual deviancy and stuff like when your estrogen crashes or when you're using some of those drugs or neurotoxic, there's some serious developmental stuff where that can influence the person you become as a young person. Do you know what I mean? Like your usage at those ages can seriously alter your behaviors and your thought patterns as you get older if you're constantly exposed to drugs that impact how you're thinking, impact your behaviors.
yeah, yeah. That's look, I without doubt was probably let certain compounds affect me more than they should have when I was a teenager, just because I
Mhm.
didn't have enough foresight to be like, well, this is the hormones.
Yeah,
This is not
yeah, yeah,
warranted.
yeah.
That little
Like,
blow up because
oh, I see you,
something small
bro.
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Easy
it's
to identify and be like, no, I'm not angry. No, 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 no. Like, okay, like stop. It's like, I'm gonna die next week. You know?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, for sure. It's yeah, especially when you're young, your ability to critically think and
Mm.
you know make smart decisions is just not there.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, I do. I'm not against steroid use in younger ages, but I do think if you are going to be embarking on steroid use, get a coach
Mhm.
and sit down with that coach, and hopefully that they're honest enough with you. Ask them if they truly think that you have, or that your goals and your reasoning for taking steroids in the first place are realistic.
Yeah.
If your
Do you have
goal
it
is
or
to
do you
be,
not have it? Do you know what I mean? Do I have it?
yeah,
Do I
exactly,
have it or do I not have it? You know,
yeah.
that's an important one. Love it. I got injured. Is BPC 157 and TB 500 the fucking bee's knees in terms of recovery? Is it better than just grabbing some HGH from like a soft tissue injury regeneration standpoint? And do you have like a blanket like, cool, I know it's hard to do a blanket, but do you have like a blanket, cool, you've torn your hamstring, take it for 4 to 6 weeks, good to go.
Um, Look, BPC TB500, they're the Wolverine stacks, extremely popular.
Where's the Wolverine stuff
Um,
from? I heard this a couple of times, and I'm
I don't
new to
know.
I'm new to this thing.
It's just kind of just what I've been accepted.
Yeah,
Just heard it called it that so many
yeah,
times that I call it that too. I don't know actually where it
yeah.
originated from.
Yeah.
Um, but look, both of these two peptides, TB500, a lot of what you'll read online is based off thymosin beta 4.
Mhm.
TB500 is a fragment of thymosin beta 4.
Yeah, I was listening to this
BTC
recently.
157 is a fragment of body protection compounds. So a lot of people get those wrong. They think TB500 is thymosin beta 4. and that BPC 157 is body protection compound. Neither of them are those compounds. They
Yep.
are fragments of the initial peptide. Um, I think where BPC and TB500 are really good is that they, as a kind of a blanket general recovery aid, they work for most things. They are
Yep.
going to improve most injury healing.
Mhm.
BPC has a few mechanisms of action. One of its mechanisms of action is upregulating the expression of the growth hormone receptor.
Mhm.
Um, so effectively, you're going to get more action out of the same amount of growth hormone. So that can either be exogenously applied or endogenously
Okay, so
produced.
whether it's exogenously applied or whether it's like endogenously, it doesn't matter. So
It doesn't matter.
it's still up. It means it's upregulating the use of that growth hormone.
Look, in fact,
Interesting.
I,
Okay.
I would even say that. So when you take exogenous growth hormone, you're only taking one form of human growth hormone. Um, it's a weight variant.
Hmm.
We produce multiple different forms of human
Yes.
growth hormone within our body. So there may actually even be additional benefit to having endogenously released growth hormone over exogenous.
Yeah.
Having said that, due to the upregulated expression of the growth hormone receptor caused by BPC, combining it with some form of either exogenous growth hormone, maybe growth hormone peptides, does make sense, because you kind of a 1 + 1 = 3, you're getting more expression, and then more hormone
Yeah.
is going to kind of amplify the result. Um, Another area where both of these drugs tend to work really well is through promoting angiogenesis, which is formation of new blood vessels, as well as cell migration, particularly with TB500. So the migration of cells from other areas of the body to the site of injury to effectively go to work and
Mhm.
repair, the injured cells. Um, the increase in blood flow or angiogenesis, blood vessel formation, also will help with stuff like nutrient delivery. So yeah, it's a very, and both also have quite strong anti-inflammatory
Yeah, yeah,
modulating
really excellent. So,
impacts as well.
there's a lot of pathways that's looking to improve recovery, like a injury or side injury, right?
Yeah,
So if you could pick one, you get injured, tear your bicep, you're gonna roll with the peptides over just like running if you had growth hormone in the fridge or you had BPC 157 and TB500, you're gonna choose the peptides over the growth hormone if you could choose one.
yeah. If I was going to choose
Yep.
one, I'd probably say you're going to get more from peptides.
Yep.
Where I think these drugs get overused or overstated is people think they just magically heal stuff,
Mm.
and that's my issue with it. Is a lot of people get an injury, and the first thing they ask is, "What do I take? Is it BPC? Do I take TB500 as growth hormone?" The first thing that happens when you have an injury should be, how did the injury occur? How
Yeah.
do I address the root cause? And
No,
how do
no,
I
no,
stop it
no,
happening
no, no,
again?
no, no, no. Fix me.
Yeah, exactly. Like these drugs work and they work
Yeah.
very well. Now, there is no denying that, you know, at least in anecdote, they've been proven very well. There's still a little bit of a lack of human clinical data on them, but
Mm.
I think through anecdote and community anecdotes, I think it's pretty obvious that
Yeah.
they work extremely
Yeah.
well. Um, but if you continue doing what caused the injury in the first place, the second you stop these drugs,
Mm.
you're going to get injured again.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that people kind of mistake with BPC and TB500 is because they do have such a strong inflammatory modulation effect. And a lot of people take them and think that they're healed after 3 days, when
Yeah,
really
they
they've
think they're
just,
good much earlier. Yeah, I know this
yeah,
one.
they've just controlled the inflammation and they've reduced the pain and
Yeah.
sensitivity, but that's just an inflammatory response.
Yeah,
That's not actually healing the
yeah,
issue.
100%. And that like that inflammatory response and like decreasing that and feeling a lot better soon is actually quite dangerous if you feel like you're like from a re-injury perspective, if it's so soon. But the integrity in the same time is likely to be better too. Like if I did the work over 4 weeks and I took the peptides or I didn't take the peptides, the likelihood of re-injury and the integrity of the tissue that's being regenerated over that 4 weeks with or without is likely to be, or almost like guaranteed to be better with the peptides on top, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Cool.
Almost always.
Okay, so super beneficial. Do you have like a protocol where it's like if you have injured or like the other year I tore my my hamstring. Do you have like a generalized sort of like protocol that you use there for like your BPC 157 or is it and TB500 or is it very individual depending on the person and the injury?
Look, I think it's a fairly similar protocols in most
Mm.
cases. I tend to stick with subcutaneous or intramuscular injection routes as opposed
Mhm.
to oral.
Yeah.
Um, BPC 157, I like to be dosed twice a day,
Mhm.
somewhere from 250 to 500 micrograms
Yeah.
twice a day.
Yeah.
TB500 doesn't necessarily have to be dosed twice a day, but
Every three
a lot
days.
of places, yeah. Having said that, a lot of places now do sell kind of BPC TB500 as a kind of blended
Yeah, I've seen this.
peptide.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, obviously I would just kind of split it into two
Yeah.
shots. You're already doing the injection anyway.
Yeah.
But the BPC I do think is best administered twice daily. BPC can be taken orally. It is derived from human gastric juices, so it
Is
does
it
tend to.
is it effective?
It is effective. It
Okay.
doesn't seem to be quite as effective microgram for microgram. It certainly does still work.
Because I know that people use, and I know I've heard of people using the ingestible BPC, like an oral BPC, as a all-round or all-year supplement in terms of like a maintenance or therapeutic supplement, and just using BPC when there's injury or issue. Is that a good option for people? Could you or should you run this year round if it's so good at regeneration and healing?
I think there are certain cases for it.
Mm.
I have one ulcerative colitis client who I do use it with year round,
Yeah.
just because BPC 157 also has some pretty profound impacts on improving of the gut lining
Yes.
and
Yeah.
different aspects of gut health. So I think in those cases where you maybe have a chronic digestive or inflammatory digestive issue, it certainly could be something that is used daily.
Uh,
I think there are some potential for it for daily use in terms of performance enhancement because it is upregulating growth hormone receptor expression. Having said that, anything that's upregulating growth hormone kind of pathways is going to increase the likelihoods of things like cancer from proliferating at uncontrollable rates. Well, it's cancer in the first place, but speeding up proliferation of cancer anyway. Um, and just other kind of um, yeah, uncontrollable replication of cells and stuff of that nature. So it's not risk free. I
yeah.
probably wouldn't say for most people to use it year round unless you have a chronic disease that
Research,
kind of
yeah.
warrants it.
Mhm.
Um, but there is in theory there would be some potential performance enhancing benefits to using it year round, just like you would use growth hormone year round in most cases, or at least I find most serious athletes
Yeah.
probably have some kind of baseline of growth hormone year round. So you could certainly make the argument for BPC being in the year round, though
Yeah.
it's not something I typically practice with clients, just from honestly a lack of experience and a lack of knowing what's going to
Mm.
happen. I would say in theory it's probably okay.
Yeah.
Um, but with clients, I try to stick away from doing anything that's experimental really with them. I kind of
Yeah,
try
for
and
sure.
save that for
Yeah,
myself
of
or,
course. Yeah, of
you
course.
know,
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Um, really quickly, 2 second answer. While we're talking about HGH as well, and talking about that, and like most people run it year round, pins and needles. We talked about this on the cure because just because I think I've got a few people that would be interested in this. We talked about it being fillers and stuff like that in certain HGHs. Two quick fixes that are going to help the pins and needles, like carpal tunnel syndrome symptoms.
increase your potassium intake, lower your sodium intake.
Great. Next one, females, PEDs, realization, masculinization, and is Anavar the best first drug for a female?
All right, context.
And
As,
I know this could
yeah,
be like a full, and we might end up doing a full conversation on this as well. But just as like a general part of our fact, I think it's important to make sure we're sort of covering the base here as well.
yeah, no, I would love to do a kind of a longer conversation
I
on
think it's just
female
so
hormone
important
use.
because I feel like it's just not talked
Yeah.
about nearly as much, right? Especially in strength. But go ahead, talk to me.
Look, Anavar, I think, as a introduction to anabolic steroids for female is probably the obvious first choice. The
You want to
androgenic
plug
side.
Do you want to plug Pet Test Australia? Do they have an Anavar test?
Yeah, they do.
Because
They
the
have
danger of, because Anavar is fantastic, right? But the danger of it not being Anavar and it being something like Winstrol can have profound impacts on that virilization and masculinization, correct?
definitely, yeah.
Oh,
That's the first thing I would say. Females, anytime they take any drug, they should be testing it prior
yeah,
to taking it.
yeah.
PED Test Australia offer some very affordable at-home testing kits. They don't necessarily give you a 100%, this is what it is at the
Mm.
exact concentration. They're able to tell you what's in the compound. So, yes, it is the compound you think it is, or no, it's not. And then a relative potency test, just which is based on like a color scale,
Yep.
where if it's this color, it's in that kind of, let's say 50 to 100 milligram range. If it's that color, it's below or whatever. So it's not necessarily going to give you like a HPLC standard
Yeah.
lab result of
But
the
it's
compound.
important for
But
females. I think especially important for females because it can carry much greater repercussions from a side effect standpoint, depending on what drug that is and depending on what they're actually getting, right?
yeah, certainly.
So VAR, first introduction to female performance drug use.
Yep. Well, I think Anavar is definitely the way to start. I personally, if the client is willing to be kind of slow and steady with things, then they're not in a situation where they kind of really need to fast track progress. 2.5 milligrams before training is probably where I'd start with most females.
Yeah.
Um, like if you look at testosterone replacement for females, for example,
Yeah.
you're looking in the range of about 3.5 to
Three
7
milligrams.
milligrams per
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
And that's keeping in mind that when you inject testosterone, that 3.5 to 7 milligrams is, if it's test E, it's I think about 70% testosterone, and then the remainder is ester.
Hmm.
So only about 70% of that 7 milligrams is actually going to be hormone.
Hmm.
So when you take Anavar, the entire milligram of what you're taking is active hormone. There is no ester attached.
Yeah.
So 10 milligrams of Anavar is 10 milligrams of hormone. 10
Yes.
milligrams of testosterone is not 10 milligrams of
Seven
testosterone.
milligrams, right? Like, yeah.
Exactly right.
Mm.
So if you're kind of looking at it on that logic, if 3.5 to 7 milligrams a week is putting you at a normal hormone range,
Mhm.
2.5 milligrams of pure androgen
Three
four
to
or
four
five
times a
times a
week.
week
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
now super physiological.
Yes. Yeah.
So most people should see a modest improvement in physique and performance goals with that. It's probably not going to be this huge life-changing cycle at 2.5
Right.
milligrams, but I think it's a perfect introduction to kind of getting your feet wet in anabolic, seeing how you're going to respond.
Yeah,
I
that's a
think a
big
lot
one.
of females will also probably maintain their cycle for a good period of time
Yeah.
on those doses.
Mm.
Depending on the age, and we briefly touched on this earlier, if you're a female who's maybe looking into their first performance enhancing drug use, who's already starting to go through menopause, testosterone is actually normally the one that I will go for, and normally just in a replacement dose. So 3.5 to 7 milligrams a week. See how you respond to that. Again, most people will be able to maintain a relatively normal menstrual cycle on those dosing.
Mhm.
And because you're going through menopause, you've now supplied a hormone which is still able to aromatize a little bit, which will support some of the estrogen production for the females.
Mhm.
And I often will also like to incorporate in peri and postmenopausal females something like DHEA for a further kind of estrogenic
Yeah.
support kind of upstream. Um, in terms of second compounds on top of that, um, and especially and this also kind of goes for younger females as well, once they've kind of already got their feet wet with Anavar.
Mm.
NPP is actually the second compound that I typically use with
So
females.
if you're going to do like a base of testosterone at 3 milligrams, but you're going to use an MPP over like a primo or something like that for females.
Yeah, especially in Australia. One of the biggest issues that we talk about with females, we've just touched on,
Yeah, we've had
is
that conversation. Yeah.
yeah, it's whether it's real. Like
Yeah.
I have coached a couple of females who have come to me taking primo, some
Mm.
at fucking absurd doses too,
Well,
and we've
also,
got to
I
pull
mean, not
bloods.
not a problem for females so much, but like fucking expensive at the
Yeah,
moment, and
yeah,
also like with China like sanctions and stuff like that, hard to find, right? Like through
Yeah,
sources,
for sure.
especially reliably. So challenging.
Reliably,
Yeah.
100%. Like I've had females come to me thinking they're taking primo. We've gone and pulled bloods, and the testosterone's come back at like a 15 or a 20 nanomole, which is a normal function testosterone level for a
So if you're
male when
using,
they're on primo, when they shouldn't have
yeah,
any.
yeah, totally. If you're using 3 milligrams of testosterone, like a replacement or like not therapeutic, but like sports therapeutic dose of testosterone for a female, what is MPP administered daily or every other day? How much of that are we looking at as like an introductory or like low level sort of like push into the anabolic worlds for a younger female?
With females, until you're experienced, I always recommend the shortest ester available for that compound.
Be able to pull it out quickly. Hmm.
Yeah, so if you experience side effects, you can get off that roller
Yeah.
coaster straight away. Whereas if you take an nth or, God forbid, you go to something like an undercyclinate or
Hmm.
something of that nature, you're stuck. You're stuck there. If you
Yes.
experience side effects, you've got to ride that out
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a couple of half-lives of that drug. Um, Kind of my normal starting range would be something like maybe 3.5 milligrams a test, maybe 1 milligram every other day. Or if you're able to do so, taking your testosterone and diluting it so that maybe your prop's no longer 100 milligrams per mil, it's 50 milligrams per
Easy
mil.
to manage. Yeah. Yeah.
Because the dosing, yeah, obviously when you're
Yeah. It's
dosing
very
1 milligram of test
yeah.
probe, it's one tip, it's one
Yeah.
IU on the insulin
Yeah.
syringe. So it's very hard to dose less than that.
Yeah.
Ideally, I would have females dilute it to a 2 to 1 so they could take 0.5 milligram
Yeah.
daily.
Mhm.
But that's probably a little bit too much of a hassle for a lot of people, especially kind of if they're just getting into
Yeah. Of
steroids.
course.
And then nandrolone, 1 milligram a day, I'll start
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
Usually I haven't gone any higher than 3 milligrams a day, and that
Yeah.
was with a female that's quite competitive at
Yeah.
professional level powerlifting comps. Um, my reason for nandrolone is one, with primobolan being so hard to get and having a lot of issues with reliability. NPP is the total opposite. Very common steroid, fairly cheap, easily. Most sources are going to carry it. Um, it has some progestogenic activity, so you're going to get some of the progesterone support with some of its activity on the progesterone receptor. So it's helping kind of maintain hormonal function from that aspect. It has a very small ability to aromatize, about 1/5 of the ability of testosterone, but it still does aromatize to some degree. So there is still some estrogen conversion that's able to take place from the nandrolone. And then obviously it's quite an anabolic compound as well. So you're able to support kind of all facets of hormone function, or at least from the sex hormone side, with a
Yeah.
combination of testosterone and
Yeah.
nandrolone. And then also total milligrams there. So like we're now at what, if we're taking, even we go to the high end of testosterone, we're at 7 milligrams and say 2 milligrams a day of NPP, that's 21 milligrams total for the female.
Yeah.
That's, I find that to be quite a,
Yeah. It's very super
like
physical, right?
it's still a very noticeable stack. Everyone I put on that or some variation of that has, steroid like results from it. It's
Mhm.
certainly not. But you look at a pretty standard anavar cycle for most females, I start 10 milligrams a day. That's 70 milligrams of pure hormone
Mm.
throughout the week that they're administering, as
Yeah.
opposed
Sure.
to 21.
Yeah.
Um, Now, the results will be as profound as 10 milligrams of anavar daily? Probably not. Um, but your
Do you think it's
lipid
safer for
parameters,
a female to just start with test? I mean, obviously it's a big jump off the deep end, but do you think it's actually safer for a female to start with like that 3 milligrams and 1 milligram and nandrolone a day or something like that versus like the average is 10 milligrams a day of Anavar. Do you know what I mean? Like
mm,
that's like the 10 milligram caps. I take one of those with my fucking morning coffee and off I go.
yeah.
Do you think
Look,
it's safer?
quite possibly, yes. I think, like, certainly if you're looking at it from like a lipid health perspective,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
anavar is rough.
Yeah.
That's the oral toxicity at the doses female users, I don't think is much of a concern,
Mm.
but the lipid skewing that occurs from even 10 milligrams of anavar is still very noticeable. I think definitely if you're looking at blood work on individual A who's on 10 milligrams of anavar, and then individual B who's on, say, 7 milligrams of test and 14 milligrams of NPP, that individual B's most likely going to have significantly better looking bloods.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, the barrier to entry, a lot of that comes down to the willingness to inject, um,
Mm.
especially females on
The
their first
high
time
barrier
around.
to entry, right?
Yeah,
A
it
high
is.
barrier to entry, even for guys. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like it's a daunting prospect if you're just not used to it.
yeah. Um, the good thing with those kind of doses are we're talking like one, two, three, maybe four ticks on an insulin syringe. So
Mm.
you can draw those up in a little 50 unit insulin pin with
Mhm.
a tiny little tip on it and throw that subcutaneously. And it's,
Yeah.
you know, a pretty
Yeah,
minimal
the
injection. But
subcutaneous thing that makes a big difference. Even for like the TRT, like being able to do
yeah,
TRT subcutaneous makes a big difference to like intramuscular. Here's a 23, a 25 gauge needle, like it's a much lower barrier with those. I've got
definitely.
guys who have never used a needle or will never use a needle, but they'll use BPC. Do you know what I mean? And comfortably.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah,
Not an issue.
yeah.
Interesting.
Look, I yeah, from a blood work perspective, I would say that the injectable route's better. I would say the one benefit with the Anavar is there's still going to be a much quicker half-life taking the Anavar. So if you
Yeah.
do experience side effects,
That's it.
whilst test probe and MPP is still going to leave your system fairly quickly. You're talking probably about a week or so before levels are kind of back to a close to physiological range if you're using injectables as opposed to the following day if you're just using the Anavar. So obviously, Anavar has a lot more. Well, actually, Nandrolone has some study in females as well, but Nandrolone is sorry, Anavar is quite heavily studied in both children and females. So there is well-established clinical guidelines for it's safe in um, in females and underdeveloped men or boys. So you have that clinical data there with the Anavar, which is not as much there with the Nandrolone. Um, Obviously, the androgenicity side of Anavar, the androgen effects, so the effects on tissue in relation to kind of masculinization with the Anavar do tend to be a little bit lower milligram for milligram, or a lot lower for something like testosterone,
Yeah.
and a little bit lower than something like an androlone. Um, so yeah, look, there's the pros and cons to both ways. Like if I were to kind
Individual.
of give you kind of my cookie cutter ish
Yeah.
cycle, it would tend to be something like the testosterone base, tiny little bit of MPP, and then maybe a pre-workout oral for your last
Mhm.
4 weeks of
Yeah.
heavy
Yeah. Sure.
training. So
Yeah.
something may look like, and this again, I wouldn't recommend this for first cycle. I probably do still suggest one compound at a time for a first cycle, just so that
Mm.
you have the ability to
Understand
experience side
each.
effects.
Yeah.
Yeah, but say you've had some exposure to each of these three compounds individually or with just two paired at a time, I think something like a milligram of a milligram of testosterone every other day,
Mhm.
1 to 2 milligrams of MPP daily, and then 10 milligrams of Anavar maybe
Mhm.
3 or 4 times a week for the last
Yeah.
4 weeks leading
Right.
into a comp would be a
Yeah.
great cycle for
Yeah.
a strength-based
Yeah.
person.
Love it. Now we're gonna fly through these last two because we're going to get into, I mean, especially this next one, we will get into this a little bit more. We've got a whole bunch planned, so we will delve deeper into the blood work stuff later and what you should be looking for. But I just wanted to quickly ask you, just so people sort of understand, when they're looking at their blood work or when they're getting blood work or the coaches are looking at the blood work, are there sort of five or six key important metrics that you think that are non-negotiables to look like? How many non-negotiables do you see that there are, and what are some of those really key things that people should be looking at?
Yep. So look, I have kind of two different sets of blood work that I like to use. I have like a pre-starting. There's a few markers that I would like to test in most people before they ever embark in steroids to begin with.
I'm getting on it too, by
Um,
the way. I'm on it. I'm over it. I'm working on
okay, sweet.
it.
Um, Something like a lipoprotein A is a lesser known blood test that I think is quite useful for people considering getting involved in anabolic steroids, both males and females. Lipoprotein A or LP little a is a form of LDL cholesterol that has a particular affinity to becoming bound to the inside of the artery wall. It is an independent risk factor for atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, independent of other lipid markers, so independent of your LDL, VLDL, HDL. It is a risk factor.
Yeah.
It is a genetically determined at this point marker, so it's not something that you're able to change through lifestyle, diet, supplement. There are some possible medical interventions that are on the horizon, but at this point in time, there is no way to change it really. So it's a test you get once. You either know that you're at a high risk for that or you're not.
Yeah.
The majority of people aren't going to have much notable amount of lipoprotein A found in blood, but those that do have high amounts of lipoprotein A are going to be much more susceptible to calcium plaque buildup in the arteries and atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. So straight out the gate, if you're someone who has abnormally high levels of lipoprotein A, because at this point in time we can't do anything about that, then maybe steroids are not
For you.
not for you, or you enter this knowing that you are taking on a bigger risk and that you probably need to take more measures to aggressively control lipid panel, because you can still, the other portions within the lipid panel, although they are an independent risk factor, they still contribute to a lot of the same disease states. So they're still a risk factor towards a lot of the similar overlapping disease states. So high ApoB levels are going to cause buildup of, or are going to be a contributing factor to the buildup of foam cells causing calcium plaque buildup in the arteries, as is lipoprotein A. So if you've got high lipoprotein A levels, you probably want to do everything you can to take control of ApoB containing particles. Obviously, lipoprotein A is technically an ApoB containing particle, but you can alter the other forms of ApoB containing particles like LDL and VLDL. So keeping those levels nice and low, it would be something that you would almost need to do if you were someone that does happen to have the genetically high lipoprotein A. Then going back to kind of just your standard panels, obviously I think a hormone panel to see where you kind of sit naturally is always good. Males, it doesn't really matter when you pull that. Females, typically, I think your most useful time to pull that panel is going to be during the third week of your cycle. So week one, obviously, being when you bleed or when the bleed begins. And the second, the week of the third week will be when you're going to get kind of your most useful hormone results.
Interesting.
Obviously, you can kind of use that to maybe see if you're maybe coming up on menopause, or if there's certain things you need to consider when designing the hormone stack in the first place.
Okay, so and then if there was something else that we should be looking for?
Obviously I would do a full lipid panel. Ideally, I would like to see ApoB being tested at least once to begin with. ApoB is something if ideally I'd have people test all the time. It is one of those tests that tends to be an add-on, usually costs about $100 just to get that one test. So in my practices, I tend to kind of test ApoB upon onboarding, and then maybe once a year, or only test if that kind of individual sits at a higher risk factor, just because it's cost prohibitive.
Is there anything that you think, if you're going to choose one that you think is, I know the answer to this because I've seen some recent posts, but if there's one that you think is over considered, or if there's something you think is relatively redundant that people hold in too high of a regard, what would that be?
A standard lipid panel, or at least the way in which a standard lipid panel is interpreted. ALT and AST are horrendous markers for liver status in athletes.
I did enjoy watching you tee off, and I did have a look through the comments too.
I got a bit of shit for that one.
But
look, it's that's honestly, it surprises me, because you think at this day and age there's so much information available that people still looking at ALT and AST in athletes, and like doctors do it. Like I had a friend of mine.
Do you want to just quickly just go through like why you think it's like go, because obviously I read the spiel and stuff, but just very quickly and briefly, why do you think it's redundant or relatively redundant?
Because ALT and AST are huge byproducts of muscle breakdown.
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah,
if
perfect.
we're on the same pathway, creatine kinase is another one that is completely
Yeah, and
redundant in any one of
that was the
ours.
other one that I was going to say. Like CRP, really looked at, right? Like high CRP. It's like, well, did you train legs yesterday? Do
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like unless you're going to take 4 or 5 days off from training, which you're not going to do for a fucking blood test because you're
yeah,
an athlete, like CRP is way overlooked. Like, well, this your CRP is high. Well, like, yeah, no shit. I was sick
yeah,
last week and I'm stressed as fuck and I'm like I train hard. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
Um,
I still do look at CRP a little bit, but that it's like everything has to be taken within context.
yes.
When
Yeah,
blood
yeah.
work is drawn, I always ask the athlete, when was your last leg
Yeah.
session? What did you do the day prior? Is there anything out of the ordinary?
Yeah, it's not redundant. It's just contextual, right? It's understanding.
Exactly
And
right.
I
Contextual.
think anything with blood work, it's it's not a standalone. You need data.
Yeah,
One is like it's not one, it's over the last 3 years. Where do you sit? Where do you sit
for
when the
sure.
drugs are high? Where do you it's like, oh, I only get them when I've been off. It's like, well, you should get them when you're on. What's happening when the drugs are high, not just low.
Yeah,
We need
yeah,
data.
no, for sure. You need to see where you're at all stages. I think the biggest thing which separates people that are really good at reading blood work and people that kind of can just skim over it is being able to cross reference. So you can generally look at a couple of different markers and maybe CRP is elevated, but other inflammatory markers are normal. So you've got normal homocysteine, you've got normal ferritin, vitamin D levels are normal. There are other areas within the bloods that you can look to cross-reference a result and say, okay, this is maybe what this marker is telling me. What are these markers telling me? Are these markers all giving me the same picture? Because if they are all giving me the same picture, then maybe there's something going on.
Yeah,
But
sure.
then if they're not, maybe that one mark is skewed because, as you said, the athlete trained legs yesterday and they've just created a ton
Yeah.
of inflammation. And so,
And is it relative? Like if we're pulling on
exactly.
one lever over here, yeah, it's fucking way out of range, but is it expected based on what's happening over here? So like you pull
Yeah,
one lever, other levers are going to move, right? So there's normal and there's a normal range, but there's also a normal range based on what everything else is doing relative to each other, right?
for
Depending
sure.
on your usage. Anyway, I found that really interesting. The very last question for today's anabolic FAQ, which is not really an FAQ. Your testosterone, you crash on an island, and you can take and you can take two other compounds with you for the rest of your life. What are those other two compounds? Only two.
Oof, two. Right. That's a tough one.
I was kind of gave you two. I think two's nice. Like two's
Um, for me, I'm probably taking growth hormone and insulin.
cool. Yeah, great.
Oh, look,
The
well, look,
trifecta, yeah.
I've already got gyno, so I'll just let the estrogen run wild and we'll just get large and have big titties.
Yeah, I like it. Fucking love it. Thanks heaps. That's the first one. I wanted that to be relatively chill because the next ones that we're going to do, we're going to sort of delve into, or the plan is to sort of delve into the family tree and talk about the compounds themselves and talk about why kind of recommend certain compounds for strength athletes, what we should be looking for with those compounds. Are there synergies with other compounds we should be considering, what dosages, a whole bunch of stuff. So we're going to get into the family tree of stuff, how things look, and what as strength athletes we're going to prioritize, and what can we kind of, I guess you would call it. We're not going to. It's not an S tier or like a tier list, but we're going to talk about these compounds and just shed a bit of light on um, how you're actually looking at these compounds and what we should be and how we should be implementing them for a strength athlete, right? I feel like we're going to have endless ability to have these conversations pretty much.
That's
Um,
awesome. Looking forward to it.
yeah, I'm really looking forward to just having some like good, genuine, like relaxed content that informs strength athletes. I just don't think there's that much. And if there is, it's like there's some stuff behind paywalls, but often it's still quite obscure to the actual thing that we do.
Mm, yeah, definitely. It's
Uh,
look, I'm also just a gym bro. I'm not a this highly educated
mhm.
person who's going to talk in cryptic because this. I feel like we should be able to have conversations that are a lot more relatable. Like
And we
I'm,
understand,
I'm
and
not a
people can
dumbass, but I'm
understand.
also not just an
Yeah,
academic scholar
yeah,
that's living their life in books all day. A
yeah.
lot of the information I'm giving is definitely coming from literature and research, but a lot of it is also just from I tried this happened, fuck this up, I didn't fuck this up. These are my experiences. So
Love it.
there's you know yeah.
I like it. Thanks for listening. If you tuned in, there's plenty more to come from the Anabolic Enquiry. So we'll keep you posted, and there'll be another one out in the next few weeks. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you do enjoy it, make sure you hit Connor Walsh at Connor Walsh Strength Performance or Performance.
Just Walsh Strength and Nutrition.
Walsh Strength and Nutrition. Please hit him up on Instagram, and you can find I think the website's under a similar name as well.
Yeah, just be a link through the Instagram bio that you
Find his
can go to if you
Instagram,
install.
follow him everywhere. You'll be sorted. Thanks heaps for tuning in.
No, thanks heaps.